Good morning. Welcome back to our reading of Bobby the Brave Sometimes. Okay, this week we are on chapters 7 and 8. Before break, I introduced you to a new portion of our assignments. It was on a Google slide, and you had to summarize the story and make predictions. So today I want to focus a little bit more on the skill of making predictions because I saw a lot of people didn't complete that assignment, first of all. And second of all, maybe you weren't sure what, when, how to do it. So we're going to talk about it a little bit more. You're also going to have to continue to practice summarizing, which I know that we were doing before break, but I'll give you a different format to use to help remind you for now what that should look like. It's the somebody wanted but so then format, and I'll go over it when it's time. Okay, so we have a new chart. It's called Making Predictions, and I used my bright spring colors because it's looking pretty nice out today. So we have Making Predictions. So our learning target would be I can use events from the story to predict what will happen next. And that's literally what we do. We use clues from the story to create an idea of what might happen next. Why do you think I have the word clues colored in yellow? What might that signify? If I have all these words written regular, and then I went and was like, but I'm gonna make this one stand out. Why? Why the word clues? If you think it's because it needs to stand out because it's important and it's something that we need to do and be able to make a prediction, then you're right. 2 claps for you. We need to be able to use clues to make our predictions so that I know that you're not just throwing ideas out of nowhere's land. It's to refer back to what's happening in the story to let everyone know that this thought came from somewhere. It didn't just magically appear. You need to be able to identify what's happening in the story and then think about, oh, you know what I bet could happen next? And then be able to write or talk about those things. Because good readers, not only do they make connections, but they also make predictions. They are constantly thinking about what they're hearing and what they're reading so that they can really decide if they understand what's going on or not. If you're listening and no predictions are coming to mind, you're probably not listening close enough. So you should pay more attention. You can't just be sitting there watching me. You need to be hearing what I'm saying, how I'm saying it, and thinking about it. If you're not thinking as I'm reading, why are you even watching me right now? This is still school. If we're all sitting on the carpet and I was reading this to you, I'd be stopping and calling some of you out to answer questions. So I know that's not exactly what we can do right now, but make it as similar as possible. I do stop in my videos and give you a chance to think about what I'm saying. For example, why was the word clue colored? I would do that in real life. So when I stop and ask those questions, don't just keep watching, waiting for me to answer them. Actually think about it, okay? All right. In addition to what a prediction is, there's also ways that we can write or talk about them. So I gave us 2 sentence starters, and it says, we say or write, when we're talking about predictions, in the story we read blank, and that blank is where we're going to put our evidence from the text. So I predict blank. That's where you come up with your idea. So in the story we read blank, so tell me what's happening, what's the detail that sparked this idea, and I predict blank. What do you think might happen because of what you just read? And I'll show you more specifically how to do that as we read today. I'll stop and I'll actually make a prediction, and I'll tell you to pause the video and make a prediction. So today, before we start reading, I need you to have a piece of paper and a pencil, or your phone that you can type a note in real quick, something that you can jot down some predictions so that when you go to complete that assignment, you don't need to rewatch the video. You can just type what you wrote down. Make sense? Beautiful. Let's get started. Oh, that just down here in the chart is where I'll keep track of some predictions so that we can use them to see what happens. Okay, let's do this. Pants up. All right. Chapter 7. Sandy, Wilbur, and Bobby. Arf. That's what they used as a barking sound. I'm more of a woof person, but they used arf. Same thing. Bobby was having a good time in 4th grade. Weren't we all? Even if sometimes he got a stomachache from the stress of PE. Sounds relatable. There were any number of ways he could embarrass himself there, like missing an easy catch during softball or shooting an air ball in basketball. You know who you are. Or playing football. But then, he reasoned, that always made it even nicer to come back to Miss Carlson's class. She hardly ever raised her voice, plus she smelled a lot better than Mr. Reinerhouse. Class, Miss Carlson said. She was wearing Halloween pumpkin earrings. Recently, she had also worn a pair that looked like happy ghosts. I want you to be silent as we walk to the auditorium. We'll be rehearsing the musical on stage today. A murmur ran through the room. Up until now, they had been practicing on the playground. Even though they weren't doing the entire production of Annie like the professionals did on Broadway, there was still much to learn. Rehearsing on the stage took everything to a whole new level. As the students walked down the hall in a single file line, Bobby peered into the classrooms. When he saw Mrs. Woods, his 3rd grade teacher, he shuddered. Ugh. One look from her could stop a herd of wild buffalo in its tracks. This might be a place that some of you could make a connection. If you have a teacher or a paraprofessional who was intimidating and could make you stop what you were doing with one look, that might be a place that you could go back and make a connection later. The 2nd graders were doing math. It looked so easy that Bobby laughed. That's a good place to make a connection too. In the 1st grade rooms, the kids were making Halloween masks. Bobby couldn't tell what the kindergartners were supposed to be doing. They were all running around and screaming, except for a boy clutching a bowl of fake fruit and crying in a corner. Poor kid. Casey would be in kindergarten next year. Mrs. Carlson had her students sit in the audience as she stood on stage. We won't be rehearsing our musical from the beginning yet. That will come later. Today, we are going to focus on dancing. Please be aware that this stage is not that big. I don't want anyone falling off and getting hurt. Bobby felt someone poke him. I'm going to fall off on purpose, St. James promised. Okay, I'm going to make a prediction because when I read that and the way the teacher said it, it made me be like, I bet someone does fall off. And that's it. That's a prediction. You read what's happening in the story and an idea pops in your head because of it. That's how you make predictions. They really can come very naturally if you are paying attention to what's being said. When she was like, the stage is small, I don't need anyone falling off and getting hurt, instantly I thought, well, Bobby is a dog in this, and he's very clumsy, so I bet he does fall off the stage at some point. So that's my prediction. So my evidence from the text. In the story we read, Mrs. Carlson said the stage is small and she doesn't want anyone to fall and get hurt. So that is my evidence from the text. Then I need to put my idea, using clues from the story to create an idea of what might happen next. It might not happen right now. It might not happen in these 2 chapters that I'm reading today. But at some point in the story, it could happen. Your predictions don't have to come right away. They can come anytime in the rest of the story. So my prediction is, So I predict Bobby might fall off the stage because he is clumsy. I'm going to add a little clarifier here. I think it's important to use a because sentence attached to your prediction to really help us understand where that thought came from. Like, okay, she said she doesn't want anyone to fall off the stage, but why did I think Bobby would fall off the stage? Well, I think Bobby would fall off the stage because he always says he's uncoordinated, he isn't very good at sports, he gets embarrassed and awkward. So that's why I picked Bobby as the person that would fall off the stage. So I added because he is clumsy, and I want you to add a because when you're making your predictions, because if you are coming up with good ideas, you should be able to explain where they're coming from. It's kind of like using your schema when we were doing race responses. So you're explaining where this inference came from. What do you know about the situation from your own life or your other experiences that helped you come up with that idea? Make sense? Okay, so St. James just poked Bobby and said that he was going to fall off stage on purpose. We'll see. Orphans, please, Mrs. Carlson called out. I need all the orphans and Miss Hannigan on stage now. Swoozie raised her hand. Am I an orphan? Mrs. Carlson nodded. Yes, Annie's an orphan. Duh, St. James whispered to her. Little orphan, Annie, orphan, Annie, orphan. Duh. Swoozie ignored him. The girls were experts at ignoring St. James. Bobby and St. James sat back and relaxed. Daddy Warbucks and Sandy weren't in this scene. P.S. If you want to make a connection to that, because I'm sure there's people that came to mind about who you're good at ignoring, you can say that, just don't say their name. Bobby and St. James sat back and relaxed. Daddy Warbucks and Sandy were in this scene. It looked like a lot of fun dancing on the stage, and even Jackson and Chess were laughing. Some of the girls were really good dancers, including Holly, who had studied at Mrs. Cusack's School of Ballet and Tap for 3 years. When they were little, Bobby and Holly had taken Mrs. Cusack's Bitsy Baby Bouncy Bounce class together, and Bobby had won the Itsy Bitsy Bouncer Award. He hoped that Holly would never ever tell anyone about this. That might be a good place to stop and predict something, because I know I just had an idea. Finally, it was time for Annie, Sandy, and Daddy Warbucks to practice their big number. It was exciting standing on the stage. The kids sitting in the audience looked so small. As Swoozie and St. James tried out their dance, Bobby ran around on all fours barking. It felt great making everyone laugh. Sandy, be careful not to trip Annie or Daddy Warbucks, Mrs. Carlson cautioned him. Another good place to make a prediction. Daddy Warbucks, you're looking a little stiff. Can you loosen up a bit? Annie, you're doing a wonderful job, but make sure you don't step on Sandy. Here's a picture so you can see. So we have Annie, Daddy Warbucks, and this is Bobby down here playing the dog. Dancing and dog romping were way more complicated than they looked, Bobby learned. Before he could try out his barking again, the rehearsal ended. Tomorrow we'll put on the songs and dances together. That's when this will really start turning into a musical, Mrs. Carlson said enthusiastically. Now, here are the letters to your parents. Each of you will be responsible for your own costumes. If you can't bring one in, talk to me privately about it and I'll make sure you get whatever you need. Bobby looked at his letter. It read, Dear parents, Bobby has been selected to play Sandy in our class production of Annie. Please provide a dog costume for your child. We look forward to seeing you at the musical on Thursday, October 29th at 7 p.m. Yours truly, Mrs. Carlson. On the bottom of the letter, Mrs. Carlson had added in her neat cursive, P.S. Bobby is doing an excellent job as Sandy. Bobby read the letter a couple of times. He was proud to have been selected to play Sandy and was determined to be the best Sandy ever. Again, this could be a good place to stop and make a prediction, thinking about that little note that Miss Carlson put at the bottom. What might Bobby want to do with that? That is making a prediction if you have an idea. Wilbur could be Sandy, Chess mused as they walked home after school. Wilbur was Chess's dog and the finest canine Bobby had ever met, even if his breath smelled like sneakers and his fur was always matted in odd patches. They stopped at the ice cream truck. Chess bought a strawberry popsicle and Bobby dug around his pockets for quarters to buy his usual Astropop. Sandy's a mutt and Wilbur's a mutt, Chess continued as he unwrapped his popsicle. Bobby nodded. That was true. He hoped Chess wouldn't mention this to Mrs. Carlson, or else he might be replaced. Prediction. However, he thought it would be totally cool to have a real dog on stage. Hey, Chess, Bobby said, can I come over and watch Wilbur? You know, to see how he walks and runs? It's research. Sure, said Chess, but don't touch Wilbur. Remember what happened last time. How could Bobby forget? He had given Wilbur a huge hug, and that triggered a particularly bad asthma attack. Still, he loved dogs, so it had been worth it. Bobby knew that famous actors always researched their roles. His sister Annie had told him that when Mike Marvel played the rugged surfer spy in the movie Missiles Over Maui, he had eaten nothing but coconuts for a month to prepare for the role. Dog biscuits didn't taste any worse than his dad's homemade cookies. Bobby knew this for a fact. Maybe he'd eat dog biscuits the week before the show, or at least the night of it. Bobby perched on the front porch and watched Chess and Wilbur run around. One of Wilbur's legs was shorter than the others. Bobby wondered if all of Sandy's legs were the same length and how he'd find out something like that. He wanted to get the part exactly right. To make sure he wouldn't forget anything, Bobby drew pictures on the back of his math worksheet. Pictures of Wilbur running, Wilbur standing, Wilbur sitting, Wilbur happy, Wilbur sad. Wilbur drooled a lot, so Bobby tried drooling like the dog, but quickly ran out of spit. Later, he decided it was best not to drool on stage because someone might slip, and Mrs. Carlson had specifically said that she didn't want anyone falling off the stage. When it was time to go home, Bobby held off the urge to hug Wilbur. Thanks for everything, he told the mutt. Then, in Sandy speak, Bobby added, Oof, oof, oof. Arf, Wilbur answered. All right, that was the end of chapter 7. I'm still going to read chapter 8, but if you hadn't made a prediction yet, take a moment to do so. Chapter 8. So what? It's spelled S-E-W, though, not so like S-O. Bobby lay upside down on the couch and watched Princess Becky's Planet with Casey. Dada-Doo, the pint-sized dragon, was delivering a letter to the terrible teeny tiny trolls. That's when Bobby suddenly remembered his letter about the Sandy costume. When he emptied his backpack, there was a trio of craggy rocks, part of his lunch from last week, and a bunch of crumpled papers. Sounds like some of your backpacks. He found the letter and held it out to his dad. Mr. Ellis Chance stopped dusting and sat down to read. It looks like we're supposed to supply a costume for your class musical. I'm the dog, Sandy, Bobby said proudly. To show what a great Sandy he was going to be, he began to bark and romp around the room on all fours. Casey joined him. Really? Sandy the dog? I didn't know that, his dad replied, even though Bobby had told him this before. Well, I'll get started on your dog costume right away. I've always wanted to try my hand at sewing. Bobby froze mid-bark. Dad, can we just buy a costume? Why bother to buy one? Mr. Ellis Chance said. He flexed his massive biceps, which Bobby knew helped his father think. We have Grammy's old sewing machine in the attic. Bobby, I'm going to make you the best darn dog costume in the world. Casey wrinkled her nose. I didn't know Daddy could sew, she said as Mr. Ellis Chan ran upstairs. Bobby picked up Mrs. Carlson's letter off the floor. I'm not so sure he can, he said solemnly. I'm noticing that Mr. Ellis Chan didn't even say anything about Mrs. Carlson's comment at the bottom. He didn't even notice how she wrote a special note saying how good he was doing. So you could predict maybe how that could make Bobby feel. I also think that there's some places we can make connections to in this area, but I'm going to keep reading. After a dinner of Mr. Ellis Chan's tuna casserole soup, Mrs. Ellis Chan took the family to Burger Barn for a snack. I wonder why they were still hungry. Then they headed to Sew What, the fabric store. Bobby had never been to a fabric store before. There were aisles dedicated to all sorts of yarn. Thick, thin, fluffy, and fuzzy. Spools of thread in every color imaginable. And even cerulean took up an entire wall. And the knitting needles looked like the kinds of weapons that Mike Marvel, the action hero, might use when fighting off surfer spies. As Bobby explored the store, he wished he had his skateboard. It would have been so cool to skate through Sew What, making sharp cuts around the end displays and running his hands over the rows of colorful material. Can we go now? Annie moaned. I don't even know why I'm here. How about this? His mother said, pulling out a nice yellowish cotton fabric. I think Sandy is more sandy colored, Bobby noted. He was staring at some black material with glow-in-the-dark planets on it. It seemed like what would be good for something. Maybe he could talk his mother into using it for new curtains in the living room. What about this? Casey said, tugging on a bolt of fabric. It was pink and purple with hearts on it. Can we go now? Annie said louder, this time with an exaggerated yawn. Bobby wondered if all teenagers were like Annie, or if her moodiness was unique. He had asked her about it once, but after, she screamed, I am not moody! He thought it was best not to bring it up anymore. You're probably able to make connections to this part, students with older siblings. Or to yourself. Well, Bobby, what do you think of Casey's fabric selection? His mother asked, smiling. He smiled back, then said to Casey, That's nice, but not quite right for a dog costume. Can we go now? Annie asked. When can we go? Hello? Is anyone listening to me? Annie, I told you, we'll leave once Bobby finds what he needs, Mr. Ellis Chan said patiently. Hurry up, slowpoke, Annie hissed to her brother. Suddenly a voice boomed. I found it! At first, Bobby thought it was the store's loudspeaker, but then he recognized his father's voice. Bobby, get over to the Halloween and create a costume aisle. Bobby rushed over to aisle number 13. His father was beaming, and soon Bobby was too. Mr. Ellis Chan had a bolt of fabric over his head as if he were lifting weights. It was exactly what Bobby was looking for. The fabric looked like real fur. It was light brown and fuzzy and perfect. As soon as they got home, Mr. Ellis Chan set up the sewing machine in the guest room where Grammy and Gramps stayed when they visited. Wow, it's pretty, Casey said as she ran her hands over it. Be careful, Mr. Ellis Chan warned. The needle is sharp. I know, Casey said, nodding. Snow White pricked her finger on a sewing machine and fell into a deep sleep until the Frog Prince saved her by giving her shoes that fit. That's not how that happened. Casey, it was Sleeping Beauty, and she pricked her finger on a spinning wheel, Bobby informed her. They had studied fairy tales in the 2nd grade. I can identify a couple of different fairy tales in that point right there. Shoes that fit? Who's that? A Frog Prince? Who was that? Deep sleep? Who was that? Maybe, maybe not, Casey said, but I like my story better. She asked, how does the sewing machine work? Mr. Ellis Chan shrugged. I'm not sure. How hard could it be? Here's the picture. And that is chapter 8. So take a moment, make a prediction if you haven't already. Think about what sections you could connect to, and then go on and check out our assignments. Bye. See you for math tomorrow.